The story begins with a woman named Sarah, desperately running through the thick snow in the isolated mountains of Norway. The cold air bites at her skin as she frantically tries to escape. She is being pursued relentlessly. Eventually, she is cornered, left with nowhere to run. At that moment, she is attacked and devoured by a zombie wearing a World War II German SS Nazi uniform. Soon after, the scene shifts to a group of medical students who are embarking on a much-anticipated vacation trip to the mountains near Oxfjord. There are 4 men in the group: Vegard Rosten, Martin, Erland, and Roy. As they travel, they discuss Sarah, Vegard's girlfriend, who had ventured to the mountains earlier on her own. Martin, growing curious, asks Vegard why Sarah decided to leave for the mountains so early. However, even Vegard, her boyfriend, is unsure why she made the trip alone. In a separate car, we are introduced to the 3 women of the group: Hannah Delon, Liv Beck, and Chris. Their conversation revolves around the guys, playfully teasing each other. Hannah is quick to claim Martin for herself, while Chris is paired up with Erland. The group soon reaches a point where the road becomes impassable by car due to the heavy snow. From here, Vegard decides to continue the journey by snowmobile, leading the way to the cabin, while the others follow on foot, using the snowmobile tracks to guide them. As they trek through the thick snow, the group makes light of the situation, joking and laughing despite the harsh conditions. They are also told that there is no phone signal in the area, and only emergency calls can be made, adding to the isolation of their location. After a tiring journey, Vegard arrives at the cabin first. It's a desolate place, nestled deep in the mountains, far from civilization. The cabin has an eerie feel to it, as if it has been abandoned for a long time. Dust coats the surfaces, and the place feels cold and unwelcoming. Vegard lights a fire in the fireplace to bring some warmth into the space. Not long after, the rest of the group arrives, grateful to have reached their destination. They waste no time in having fun, using a tire tube attached to Vegard's snowmobile to slide down the snow-covered slopes, laughing and enjoying themselves. That night, they continue their games indoors, trying to make the most of their vacation. However, outside, Liv heads to the outdoor toilet to relieve herself. As she sits in the cold, she begins to feel as though someone or something is watching her. A sense of dread creeps over her, and just as she is about to return to the cabin, she hears a noise behind the trees. Startled, Liv rushes back inside and tells her friends about what she experienced. But they don't take her seriously, dismissing her concerns as mere nerves. Roy, Erland, and Hannah eventually decide to humor her and check outside. But before they can do much, a mysterious hiker appears at the door, asking for a cup of tea. This stranger proceeds to tell them the dark history of the area. During World War II, a Nazi unit led by SS Standartenführer Herzog occupied the region, terrorizing the local villagers. For 3 years, the soldiers brutalized the people, torturing them and stealing their valuables. As the war neared its end and Germany faced defeat, the soldiers began looting everything they could find from the villagers. However, the villagers had had enough. They rose up, ambushing the Nazi soldiers, killing most of them. The surviving soldiers, including Herzog, fled into the mountains, where they were presumed to have frozen to death. As the hiker finishes his story, he issues a grave warning to the group, urging them to be cautious and not disturb the evil spirits that still lurk in the area. His tone is serious, but Roy brushes off the warning, laughing it off. The hiker, visibly angered by Roy's attitude, leaves abruptly, disappearing into the night. Later that night, Vegard is startled awake after seeing a figure in his dreams, placing something beneath the floor of the cabin. In his dream, he believes the figure to be Sarah, and he follows her outside, only to find the figure covered in blood. However, he soon jolts awake, realizing it was just a nightmare. Meanwhile, the mysterious hiker, having set up camp in the mountains, is sitting by his fire enjoying his dinner. But even he begins to feel uneasy, hearing noises from outside his tent. Investigating the sounds, he finds nothing out of place, but just as he returns to his camp, the following morning, Vegard leaves the cabin alone to search for Sarah, determined to find her. Meanwhile, the rest of the group remains at the cabin, playing in the snow and trying to enjoy their vacation. As Vegard explores the mountains, He stumbles upon the hiker's tent. Horrified, he discovers the hiker's mutilated corpse, his intestines spilled across the snow. As Vegard stands in shock, he notices strange footprints leading away from the tent. His instincts kick in, and he begins to follow the trail. Back at the cabin, Erland accidentally finds a hidden box under the floorboards while reaching for a beer. Curiosity gets the better of him, and when he opens the box, it is filled with treasure, gold coins, jewelry, and other valuables. Excitement sweeps through the group, and they begin playing with the treasure, unaware of the dark forces they have just awakened. Meanwhile, Vegard continues to follow the footprints, which lead him higher into the mountains. As he climbs, the trail becomes more treacherous, and suddenly he falls through a thin layer of snow, plummeting into an underground cave. He loses consciousness from the impact. Back at the cabin, unbeknownst to anyone, Hannah discreetly slips a gold coin into Martin's pocket, a small act that will have dire consequences later. Erland decides to use the outdoor toilet and takes a gold coin with him. While he's outside, Chris unexpectedly joins him, sitting on his lap and playfully seducing him. They share an intimate moment, unaware that a hand has picked up the gold coin Erland had dropped. Afterward, Erland returns to the cabin, while Chris remains in the toilet. However, her moment of peace is shattered when a zombie suddenly appears and pulls her into the septic tank. Miraculously, she manages to escape and frantically calls for help. The zombie attacks again, just as Hannah opens the door to check on her. Alarmed, Hannah rushes back inside and pleads with the men to search for Chris, handing Martin a shotgun for protection. Roy checks the toilet while Martin and Erland search the area around the cabin. During their search, they discover a bag buried behind the cabin, which they quickly realize belongs to Sarah. A heated argument breaks out over whether they should continue the search or leave immediately. Hannah, feeling lightheaded, approaches the window, only to be horrified as Chris's severed head suddenly flies past. Liv, curious to see what's happening, gets too close to the window and has her hair pulled by a zombie before Hannah intervenes and cuts her free. Panic sets in as the group realizes they are under attack. They hurriedly block all the entrances to the cabin, knowing that the zombies are closing in. The tension builds as the undead begin to assault the cabin, breaking through windows and doors. One zombie manages to shatter a window, but Martin shoots it before it can fully enter. Another zombie attempts to break down the door, but Hannah manages to sever its hand, revealing a Nazi ring on the dismembered limb. The situation worsens when Erland, caught off guard, is attacked from behind by a zombie. He falls to the ground as a deep bloody wound is inflicted on his head, leaving him severely injured. By the next morning, the remaining survivors gather their courage and come up with a desperate plan to escape. The women will attempt to reach the cars to call for help, while Martin and Roy will stay behind to distract the zombies. Meanwhile, Vegard, who has regained consciousness, begins to explore the cave he had fallen into. To his horror, he discovers an arsenal of weapons, ammunition, and Nazi memorabilia, including a flag and helmets lined up neatly. At the end of the row, he finds Sarah's severed head, confirming her gruesome fate. Before he can process the sight, Vegard is attacked and thrown out of the cave, where he faces a zombie. We see Vegard in a fierce fight with the zombie outside the cave. He grabs a nearby helmet and repeatedly strikes the zombie until it collapses. Just when Vegard thinks he's in the clear, another zombie emerges from the snow. This second zombie stands still for a moment. Elsewhere in the mountains, Hannah and Liv are trying to descend, but quickly realize they've lost their way. The thick snow and unfamiliar landscape make it impossible for them to get their bearings. Just as they start to panic, a zombie suddenly appears behind them, forcing them to run for their lives. Meanwhile, back at the cave, Vegard is still battling the zombies. He manages to stab one of them in the eye with a knife, but before he can catch his breath, the first zombie, which he had assumed was dead, reawakens. The undead creature grabs Vegard and throws him off. In a desperate move, Vegard clings to the zombie's intestines, hanging precariously over the edge of the cliff. With sheer determination, he manages to knock the zombie off, but not before being bitten on the neck. Meanwhile, Hannah and Liv are still being pursued by zombies. Hannah, quick on her feet, manages to defeat the zombie chasing her by using whatever she can find. But Liv, who has become separated from her, is not so lucky. Liv is captured by one of the zombies. Realizing she has no escape, she grabs an M24 stick grenade she found and sacrifices herself, taking several zombies with her in the explosion. Elsewhere, Herzog, the leader of the zombies, gathers his troops, ordering them to continue the relentless pursuit of the survivors. His towering presence and decaying Nazi uniform make it clear that he's no ordinary zombie, and his soldiers follow his commands without hesitation. We then return to Hannah, who is now desperately trying to escape two zombies that have been relentlessly chasing her. She scrambles up a tree hoping to evade them. As she climbs, she disturbs a crow's nest, and the bird begins to caw loudly. The noise attracts the zombies' attention, and they start climbing the tree in pursuit. Just as they reach her, Hannah jumps down, grabbing a sharp tree branch on the way. With precision and force, she stabs one of the zombies in the eye before fleeing the scene. The second zombie continues to chase her, forcing Hannah to run until she reaches the edge of a cliff. With no other option, she faces the zombie head-on. As they grapple near the cliff's edge, Hannah kicks the zombie, sending both of them tumbling over the edge into the snow below. Back at the cabin, Martin and Roy are also fighting for their lives against the zombie horde. Roy, always quick with improvisation, crafts a Molotov cocktail. Unfortunately, his aim is off, and the cocktail hits the cabin wall, setting the building on fire. As the fire rages, Martin tries to call emergency services on the phone, but his report of a zombie attack is met with disbelief and skepticism by the operator, who dismisses his claims. Frustrated, Martin and Roy decide to abandon the cabin and seek refuge in the nearby shed. Meanwhile, Vegard, now alone and severely wounded, returns to his snowmobile. He stitches his neck wound using a makeshift needle and thread, sealing it with duct tape. Vegard then mounts an MG-34 machine gun onto his snowmobile, turning it into a deadly weapon. However, as he prepares to leave, a zombie ambushes him. Fortunately, a tree branch knocks the zombie off the snowmobile, allowing Vegard to continue his mission. Elsewhere, Hannah wakes up buried under the snow, dazed and confused. She manages to free herself from the snowdrift and takes a moment to regain her composure, but as she looks around, she notices the zombie that had chased her earlier is still trapped beneath the snow. Without hesitation, Hannah delivers a swift kick, ensuring the zombie stays down for good. Back at the shed, Martin and Roy are arming themselves with whatever tools they can find to fight off the horde. They gather hammers, axes, and any sharp objects they can use as weapons. The two men engage in a brutal, bloody battle against the zombies, hacking and smashing their way through the relentless attackers. It's a fight for survival, and they show no mercy. Just when it seems the battle is turning in their favor, Vegard arrives on his snowmobile, gunning down zombies with his machine gun. His arrival brings a brief moment of hope as he mows down the undead and runs over several zombies with his snowmobile. However, the relief is short-lived. As Vegard pauses to speak to Martin and Roy, the zombies reanimate behind him. In a terrifying turn of events, they lift Vegard into the air and tear his body apart, ending his life in a gruesome fashion. Martin and Roy, devastated by the loss of their friend, are forced to continue the fight on their own. In the midst of the mayhem, Martin accidentally strikes Hannah, who had just returned to the scene. To his horror, Martin watches as Hannah falls to the ground, her life slipping away. Grief overtakes him as he realizes that Hannah has been mortally wounded. The story takes a dramatic turn as Herzog and his zombie troops arrive. Roy quickly alerts Martin, who is still reeling from Hannah's death. Shaken but determined, Martin grabs his shotgun and begins firing at the zombies, but his ammunition quickly runs out. As he fumbles for more bullets, a zombie ambushes him, biting into his arm. Roy comes to Martin's aid, helping him kill the zombie, but the damage has already been done. Martin, terrified at the prospect of turning into a zombie, remembers what he's learned about zombie infections. Knowing that he must act quickly, he decides to amputate his bitten arm to prevent the infection from spreading. Once the arm is off, he quickly cauterizes the wound by burning it to stop the bleeding. Just when Martin thinks he's in the clear, another zombie lunges at him. Now bitten, knows his time is limited, contemplates amputating, but Roy stops him. The two friends stand together, facing the inevitable. as Herzog roars in fury, rallying his undead troops. With the zombies closing in, Martin and Roy decide there's no choice but to flee. They sprint down the mountain, but the zombies are fast, relentlessly chasing them through the snow. As they run, Roy becomes entangled in a tree branch, causing him to stumble. Before he can recover, Herzog catches up to him. In a brutal and swift move, Herzog smashes Roy's head with a hammer, killing him instantly. Martin watches in horror from a distance as Herzog reaches into Roy's pocket, one of the treasures they had unknowingly taken. Realizing that the zombies are after the treasure, Martin knows what he must do. He races back to the cabin, now a smoldering ruin after the fire, to retrieve the box of treasure they had found. After locating the box, Martin leaves the cabin, hoping to escape with his life. Then a zombie takes the box and hands it over to Herzog. With no other options, Martin heads down the mountain alone. He eventually reaches his car. He gets inside, exhausted and emotionally drained, his body trembling as he prepares to drive away. Just as he's about to start the car, a gold coin falls out of his pocket. In that moment, he realizes with dread that he had unknowingly carried one of the cursed coins with him. It had been slipped into his pocket by Hannah earlier, sealing his fate. Before he can react, Martin looks up to see Herzog standing outside the window, his cold, lifeless eyes locked on him. Without warning, Herzog smashes through the car window, and the screen fades to black, leaving Martin's fate unknown. And the film ends. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Because by subscribing, you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.